A lot of people think of dopamine as the body's happiness chemical. While that's not wrong, it's definitely not the whole story. Dopamine is responsible for a lot of really complex tasks and systems in the body. Productive states are one of them. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at how dopamine is being hijacked in the modern era and how this is negatively impacting our ability to be productive and find success in life. Welcome back to Coach Stack, your secret weapon for improving yourself through business, investing, and personal growth. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss out on our next videos. Alright, let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. Dopamine is a chemical that gets produced and handed out by the brain's reward centers. You probably knew that, but it's important to make the reward aspect crystal clear. What is a reward? According to most definitions, it's a thing given in recognition of a service, effort, or achievement. Dopamine is no different. It's a reward that your brain gives you in recognition of a service or achievement it decides is worth it. The brain's process for deciding what kinds of things deserve a reward is dictated by hundreds of thousands of years of survival evolution. From that perspective, anything that a person does in order to survive deserves a reward. That means dopamine's real purpose in the body is pretty straightforward. It's supposed to make you keep doing the things you need to do. This has been incredibly important to humanity's success as a species. Think about it. For most of human history, we had it pretty rough. Recent scientific research is suggesting that early human beings were persistent hunters. That means that when they wanted to eat meat, they needed to keep chasing after an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion. That usually took a bit of time. Well, maybe longer than a bit. One modern example of this is the annual man against horse race in Arizona, where human runners compete against horses. Obviously, the horses start out way ahead, but over the course of around 7 hours and 50 miles, some runners manage to catch up. This incredible feat is perhaps similar to what average human beings needed to do in the past. And what is it powered by? Primarily dopamine. Things that require this kind of endurance and mental toughness probably aren't what most modern humans would consider fun. That's where dopamine comes in. In the past, dopamine was essential for keeping people from just giving up on the whole survival thing. This incredible chemical could compel people to push themselves in pursuit of food or water, friends, tools, anything that made the person and the species better off. Well, it's worked out pretty well for humanity. The thing is, our lives today are nothing like our ancient ancestors. They're not even similar to our recent ancestors. We've reached the point where we can essentially recreate our environments in whatever way we want, whenever we want to. A lot of times, this is happening so fast that our genetics get left playing catch-up. Geneticist John Hawkes calls this unnatural selection, a term that he uses to highlight the fact that the world we've created isn't actually that well suited to the facts of human genetics, at least in some ways. Our body's willingness to hand out dopamine is a great example of this. There are 3 main aspects of modern life that tend to hijack our dopamine production. The first is the existence of essentially unlimited dopamine sources. Dopamine gets released when you drive 5 minutes to McDonald's, just like it got released when your ancestors finally caught up to the deer they'd been chasing for 30 miles. The difference is that driving to the store is easy, and easy to do again and again and again. Dopamine is the perfect tool to get us to do the difficult but essential things. But in modern life, most essential things are easy, sometimes as easy as calling, tapping, scrolling, or clicking. That means you're constantly getting rewarded for things that no longer really deserve a reward. The second is the existence of dopamine triggers that are actually bad for us, or at least triggers what become bad for us over time and with overuse. In the past, the things that released dopamine were almost exclusively things that were good for us. Today, that just isn't the case. Whenever you have a beer or a glass of wine, dopamine gets released and your brain gets to work thinking up ways to get more. Even if you don't have a problem saying no to drinks, the same effect is happening subconsciously. You can probably guess why that's a problem. The final aspect is the existence of unnatural triggers that release way more dopamine than anything found in nature. One way dopamine responds to different stimuli is measured with dopamine units. For example, having fun with friends releases about 120 dopamine units and having sex releases 200. Now, compare those natural behaviors with some unnatural ones. For example, playing video games releases 175 dopamine units. Smoking a cigarette releases 220, and gambling releases 240. We're not even at the extreme end of the spectrum yet. Some drugs release upwards of 1,250 dopamine units straight into your brain. Natural behaviors don't stand a chance against responses like that. What does all this mean? To summarize, your body is receiving way too much dopamine for the wrong reasons. That can have serious implications for your ability to stay focused and productive. It comes down to an effect that I'm going to call dopamine tolerance. It works like this. When you do something good, your body releases a certain amount of dopamine that produces a proportional effect. If you immediately do that thing again, two things will happen. Your body will release less dopamine because, well, there's less in the body. And two, the dopamine that is released will produce a weaker effect because most of your brain's dopamine receptors are full of the last release. Now let's move this effect into the context of productivity. Imagine you have a ton of work you need to get done, but decide to hop into a game with friends before starting. By the time you get started on your work, your dopamine tolerance will be up and you'll be receiving way less reward for the achievement of crossing things off your to-do list. This makes the work less fun, which leads you to getting bored, which leads to the work being sloppily done. It's a vicious cycle. Now that you know how your brain's dopamine reserves are being hijacked by your environment, you can start to practice ways of protecting them. There are two ways you can go about this. The first is by boosting your body's ability to produce dopamine. The theory goes that if your body is able to produce more dopamine, the fact that it's being hijacked will have less of an impact on your productivity. There are a ton of ways you can do this. For example, one study found that 20 minutes of exercise can be enough to give a person a boost in dopamine production that can last for days afterwards. In addition, healthy, high-protein foods like eggs, cheese, yogurt, and lean meats also up your body's ability to produce dopamine due to building block amino acids like tyrosine and phenylalanine. The second way is by reducing your dopamine tolerance. Essentially, this means cutting out some of the environmental dopamine hijackers so that your body is more sensitive to dopamine when it receives it as a reward for hard work. Again, there are tons of ways to go about this, but today I want to quickly mention digital detoxing. Technology is one of the biggest dopamine triggers in our lives due to crazy amounts of visual, auditory, and mental stimulation it's capable of producing. You know the anxious feeling you get when you forget your phone at home? That's your brain entering a state of panic at the thought of going without one of its primary sources of dopamine for a few hours. By consciously choosing to avoid non-essential technology usage for a few hours, days, or even weeks, you can start weaning your body off of its reliance on technology. You'll see a boost in motivation due to your brain's increased dopamine sensitivity that you can use to focus on things that will help you succeed in life. That's all for today's video. Hopefully it inspired you to start thinking differently about the relationship between dopamine and productivity. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any Coach Stack content in the future. We'll see you next time.